I was talking with an old friend of mine recently, and we got into the subject of predestination. It seems that the problem of predestination is troubling a lot of religious people these days, especially the Christians. Why is this? The subject of predestination isn't a new one, but is growing rapidly in popularity as a question for young religious folk. Let's explore what this idea really is, see the problems people are having with it, and maybe find a solution so that we can ease some of the stress, because the topic sure does put some stress on the soul. The idea of predestination was popularized during the Protestant Reformation, mainly by the great John Calvin, who gave us the ideology of Calvinism. It is important to note here that Calvinism is not a denomination, but an ideology that exists within most forms of Christianity. The particular part of this ideology that we're talking about today has to do with the first point of TULIP, total depravity. To make a long story short, predestination is the idea that the soul is deemed to have been saved or damned even before an individual is born. This is troubling for people because it instills a fear inside of them. They begin questioning if their soul is really one that is saved, or if they are already damned to hell without having anything to do about it. It involves the question of free will. Are we really free to choose good and reject evil, accepting Jesus as Lord and Savior and make it into heaven? Or are we bound to an eternal fire and there is nothing we could have ever done about it? There's good biblical and theological reasoning for this. Picking up Luther's argument about Ephesians 2:8-10, about that salvation is a free gift from God, and that there is no way for an individual to earn it or work for it, this must mean that it is up to God's own discretion as to which souls ultimately go where. If there is nothing you can do to merit salvation, this must mean that there is also no prayer or belief you can hold which can merit salvation either. Asking Jesus to be your personal Lord and Savior is not what gets you into heaven. So then how do some people go to heaven and others go to hell? Simple. God just chooses. This is where people get very frustrated. How could a loving God plant his creation and then not even give them the choice as to accept the message of redemption? It's simply unjust to send someone to eternal torture and pain even when they didn't even have the chance to do the right thing. They didn't even have the free will to make their own choices. This election is rigged. First impressions are often wrong. A Calvinist friend of mine once put his beliefs this way. Don't think of it as God as picking people up and lifting them into heaven or throwing them into hell at his own whim, but more like this. Because we were all born with a stain of sin on our souls and are therefore deemed guilty before God, we are all bound for hell from the very beginning. So the analogy looks more like all of humanity running downhill towards hell, but out of his own mercy, God picks up certain individuals and saves them from their own desires, which further their sprint into hell. It's still not a pretty situation, is it, though? Although it paints a nicer picture of God's sovereignty as decider of fate, it still doesn't seem fair to the individuals who still, by no fault of their own, are allowed by the all-loving God to fall into hell. How can we reconcile this? Well, I believe I have the solution. While I was thinking about the subject, I recalled back to an argument I've had with myself years before about the unbound time frame that God works on. This is what I believe holds the key to solving this mystery. You see, you need to understand that just because of God's omnipresence and omniscience, God has a different perspective concerning time. Think of it this way. Because you and I are stuck on this linear perception of time, we are only able to perceive 3 time frames, that being the past, the present, and the future. We remember what happened in the past, we know what is happening in the present, but we are still unsure of what will happen in the future. This is always the case. As the past stays in the past, the present continues to become a collection of memories in the past, and the future becomes known in the present, but there always is a future to look forward to. This is how we perceive time to work. However, God is not bound by time in the way that we are. God's memory is the same as it was in the beginning, is now, and will be in the end. To God, in the beginning, the end had already happened, and in the end, no more will be known to God than had already been known in the beginning. In other words, the story of creation and the world as we know it is not a line, nor is it a circle. It's more like a dot. Everything happened, or is happening, or will happen, depending on the way you look at it, is collective in one singular unit of time, so unified that the case is that time is not real, but an illusion we are all experiencing through our perspective. To us, there may be in fact a line, and we are stuck on a moving integer, but to God, there is no line, but only the integer. The future happened at the same time the past will happen, and we will experience a travel through it that we call the present. Consider a novel. A novel has characters playing out parts in a universe created by the author. The characters exist in the present based on what page number the reader is currently on, but the conclusion of the book is being held by the same hand that holds the past. The story is one unit of time, but the present is determined by which page number the reader is open to. But you may say that the characters do not actually have free will because their fate is already determined by the author and cannot escape the life that the author pens for them. Instead, think of it this way. The characters do have free will. The author does not force any character to do anything, but dictates the story that already developed in the author's mind. Within the story itself, the characters are free to do what they please. In John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men, it was George's own choice to shoot Lenny. Steinbeck did not force George to do so. In this way, we can see our own life as being played out like a novel. Your actions have been decided, but you're the one who will decide them. You just haven't gotten there yet. The end is there, it's already been written, but it's only seen as predestined because it was known by God from the beginning, not that it was determined or decreed by God from the beginning. It just was, is, and will be. This can be translated in soteriological terms. The Calvinists say that a soul was predestined one way or another. In human terms, this is true, but this doesn't infer a lack of human will to change their own future. You cannot change your election, either become saved or lose your already had salvation, but you can live your life that fulfills the part of an individual who is of the elect. In doing so, you can rest assured that you are among those redeemed by God.